Good morning, everyone. My name is Kay Jacobson, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our summer session of Great Decisions this morning. This morning's talk is on AI and American national security, and our presenter is Christi Siver. Christi is a professor of political science at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. She holds a master's in international relations and international economics from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a PhD in political science from the University of Washington. So once again, this talk is brought to you by cooperation from the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, Ramsey County Libraries, Global Minnesota, and the Foreign Policy Association. So it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Christi Siver.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here. So, I'm excited to talk about this issue of artificial intelligence and national security. And I hope we have a good audience today. It is a little rainy outside, so I suppose that's a good time when we can kind of think about some of the challenges that are facing us in our future, and particularly one that is challenging and kind of pressing right now. I really love this drawing. It is actually created through artificial intelligence by artist Timo Elliott. And the caption is, I think, really interesting. This is obviously an older robot showing a younger robot, a picture of a depiction of a brain. And he's telling him that this is the original processor. And so I think it's important for us to remember that while artificial intelligence is kind of allowing us to make amazing advances in terms of all of the things that we as humans can do, it isn't a brain. And so while artificial intelligence can do many things, it cannot think. And so whatever it does, it will be limited by humans, and we should kind of be careful about that when we think about especially the potential of artificial intelligence to be autonomous. So I'll just to kind of give you a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about today. First, I'll give you a little definition of what is artificial intelligence, how artificial intelligence has become a part of our policy conversations. How does artificial intelligence particularly impact national security? And this will be our focus for the conversation today. I'm happy to talk about this more broadly, although I'll be honest that I am not a computer scientist. You've heard my expertise. My expertise is more in the field of international relations and international security, but I'm happy to kind of try and answer broader questions. What efforts have been made to regulate artificial intelligence, particularly in the field of national security? And then what is current US policy on artificial intelligence and national security? So starting from the position of a definition, I thought this definition kind of was helpful. The ability of machines to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. For example, recognizing patterns, learning from experience, drawing conclusions, making predictions, or taking action, whether digitally or as the smart software behind autonomous physical systems. And so we really think of artificial intelligence as taking something that humans could and would do, except for the fact that humans cannot comprehend the vast amounts of data that artificial intelligence can. And so we can feed large and larger amounts of data into artificial intelligence systems, and they can find those patterns that we as humans just don't have the capabilities, the cognitive capabilities to process. We've kind of created the mechanisms and the heuristics to process them, but we don't physically have the abilities to do that. And let me show you a graph that will kind of explain that in a little more depth. So this graph kind of shows us how artificial intelligence has evolved over the decades. And this is actually probably a little bit easier to see in a virtual presentation than it is in person. So what we're seeing here is kind of at the bottom axis is years. So the development of artificial intelligence from 1940 to 2020. And then going up, we're seeing kind of the increase in computing capabilities. So we're going from 10 flop, and this is a floating operating procedure, and that is kind of a basic computation or a floating point operation. So this is equivalent to one mathematical task. So doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So if we look at that system, the Theseus system built in 1950, it could do about 40 floating point operations. So it could do, 10 computations. Look at the number of systems that can do up to 10 billion petaflop. And just to give you a sense of the enormous computing power that is, a petaflop is 1 quadrillion flop. So 1 quadrillion um, floating point operations. And you can see the concentration from 2010 to 2020 of the multiple different systems that have developed to kind of do this kind of massive computing ability. So there is no way that you or I, or as humans, could do this kind of number of computations. So we've created these computations, right? We know how how the underlying math works, but we as humans, even teams of humans, even hundreds or thousands of humans, would not be able to do the kind of computations and the pattern finding that artificial intelligence can do. And so artificial intelligence kind of vastly expands our capabilities, but it doesn't think, right? And that's I think an important thing to remember as we're thinking about artificial intelligence. So why did we start thinking about artificial intelligence as a part of public policy conversations? Well, this all really comes back to the rise of and kind of the exposure of Cambridge Analytica. And you might remember this from the role that Cambridge Analytica played in kind of exposing the way that Facebook took our personal data and kind of leveraged it for both the 2016 Brexit campaign and then the 2016 US political campaign. So Cambridge Analytica using these what seemed like very benign quizzes, kind of what Hogwarts house are you? Collected people who took these quizzes, individual data through Facebook. But they also collected that person's Facebook friends' individual data. They collected that person's friends' data that were not on Facebook. So it ended up being this tremendous amount of data that Cambridge Analytica collected. And with that data, they were able to create micro-targeted political campaigns that ended up playing, a pretty important role in these in the Brexit in the US 2016 presidential election. And so just the way that data can be leveraged in the way that artificial intelligence allows data to be magnified and misinformation to be magnified is something that we really didn't understand until kind of this scandal came to light. So there are two kind of key ways that I think it's useful to think about how artificial intelligence impacts national security. And I'm sure there are many more, and I'm happy to answer questions about them during the Q&A. But I'm going to focus on how artificial intelligence affects cyber attacks, and then also the use of autonomous and semi-autonomous drones. So we'll talk about those two examples specifically. So first, in terms of information warfare, artificial intelligence helps sort through big data to make connections from intelligence information. So we get tons and tons and tons of signals intelligence, information coming from around the world. We try and identify suspicious activity, assess patterns, connect networks, and predict future efforts. But we are not alone. The United States is not alone in trying to collect this information and trying to understand what's going on in the world. We are also not alone in trying to potentially disrupt the activities of our adversaries. And so in January of 2025, dozens of hacking groups in more than 20 countries turned to Google's Gemini chatbot to assist with malicious code writing. And what they did is they used Gemini to hunt for publicly known cyber vulnerabilities and research into organizations to target for attack. And that was kind of among other things that Google's cyber threat expert said. So Google internally discovered this threat. More than 20 China-linked groups and at least 10 Iran-linked groups were seen using Gemini, making them easily the most active countries seeking to use the chatbot. Now, the Wall Street Journal in April of 2025 reported that Chinese officials in December, so kind of December of 2024, acknowledged in secret meetings with the Biden administration that they were behind a very serious series of cyber attacks labeled Volt Typhoon on infrastructure sites in the United States, including ports, water utilities, and airports. And the Chinese alluded to the fact that these attacks were a warning to the United States about its support for Taiwanese independence. Even as late as May 22nd of 2025, the US Department of Justice issued a federal indictment for a group of 16 Russian nationals and took down their sprawling botnet, that was called DanaBot, which was a malware operation which infected at least 300,000 machines around the world, primarily used for-profit criminal hacking. But a second variant of the malware was used in espionage against the military, government, and NGO targets, causing millions of dollars in losses. But in 2019 and 2020, a version of this malware was used to target Western government officials in apparent espionage operations. So what artificial intelligence does is it enables criminals and kind of adversarial intelligence agencies to kind of magnify their activities, right? Not only can they use artificial intelligence to probe our own cyber defenses to kind of seek out vulnerabilities, but they can also use bots and other artificially intelligence powered kind of information dispersal agents or malware distribution in order to kind of achieve their own nefarious ends. And sometimes this is as not benign, but as banal as kind of, general transnational criminal activity. But sometimes it is more serious in terms of, supporting, for example, one of the primary kind of proponents of this kind of malware or ransomware is North Korea. And one of the reasons that North Korea does this is to continue to fund their nuclear activities. And so we have to be really aware of kind of how artificial intelligence supercharges our adversaries' abilities to kind of continue to kind of probe and threaten our own kind of reliance on information, which grows and grows and grows every day. I mean, here we are sitting in a virtual education seminar, which is, of course, incredibly reliant on all kinds of informational technology. When we think about the role of drones, I mean, we can't escape the fact that we just saw this incredibly successful attack by Ukraine on Russian planes. And to a large degree, this has been enabled by Ukraine's incredible ability to be successful in developing both kind of semi-autonomous drones and kind of the technology that would allow them to overcome a lot of other technological barriers um, that traditionally would have put them much further behind what we might consider the brute force of Russia. So drone use in Ukraine has really changed the nature of warfare in what, was kind of when it started in 2022 considered a fairly conventional, kind of territorial conflict. These drones that Ukraine has developed can lock onto targets, they can launch when in range. They develop these lethal drones from off-the-shelf devices, these quadcopters that you see in the mall, right at kiosks during holiday times. They're using easy-to-design software, powerful automation algorithms, and specialized AI chips. Using deep learning, the models interpret and respond in real time to video and camera footage. Automated drones can even counteract jamming efforts that can disrupt communication between the drone and the pilot. The developers are pulling data and videos from flight simulators and previous frontline drone flights. Stuart Russell, who is really kind of one of the original creators of artificial intelligence, he's a top scientist and professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and has become probably one of the leading voices warning about kind of the spread of artificial intelligence. He's kind of warned about what we're seeing in Ukraine with drones, and he said there will be weapons of mass destruction that are cheap, scalable, and easily available in arms markets all around the world. A scholar from the Center for Security and Center for International Security that was recently in Ukraine um, kind of visited the front line and saw that Ukraine is advancing these AI-driven unmanned systems to reduce direct warfighter involvement while enhancing combat effectiveness. They are training AI models on small data sets. And as they are able to kind of streamline the amount of data that they can use to train the drones, that means that the chips can be smaller, the chips can be less sophisticated, and that also means that the drone can carry more and more firepower. So this is a really kind of increasing the firepower of the drones. It also means that it's quicker for them to deploy the drones because there's faster and efficient onboarding processing. And the other thing that's really concerning is they're delegating target recognition to AI-enabled systems, reduces the human limitations, and allows locking onto targets up to 2 kilometers away. So one of the biggest limitations right now in the war between Russia and Ukraine, and one of the key countermeasures against drones has been jamming on both sides, that both Russia and Ukraine will try and jam the connection between the drone operator and the drone. And sometimes in Russia, they will even try and kind of take control of the drone and kind of bring it over to their side. Um, if Ukraine is able to make their drones fully autonomous, then those drones will be able to kind of lock onto targets and hit their targets without the need of basically a human in the loop. There will be no more kind of need for a human to kind of pull that final trigger for the drone to lock on and kill its target. These drones are also being used in the war in Gaza, and artificial intelligence is kind of playing kind of a multi-prong role in Gaza. And I think it's important to see how kind of AI is working in concert through multiple systems. And this use of AI has been reported through multiple sources. So there are 3 systems that Israel is reportedly using. The first is called Gospel, which marks buildings that it says Hamas is using. And all of this is kind of bringing together multiple sources of intelligence. Lavender goes through surveillance data. from photos to phone contacts to determine the likelihood of an individual being a militant. And then that militant gets a score, or that individual gets a score, and individuals with higher ratings are put on a kill list. And then Where's Daddy tracks targets and tells the Army when they are in family homes, which are easier to bomb than protected military buildings. IDF soldiers have reported that they treated the AI output of these systems as if it were a human decision, but these systems have a 10% error rate. So what we're seeing is these AI systems are kind of making these targeting decisions, and kind of also making timing decisions, i.e. when should individuals be struck. And the IDF soldiers are kind of treating these decisions as orders, but those orders aren't coming from any humans, right? They're coming from these AI systems. Um, Also, Israel has deployed these quadcopters, which again are kind of these small level drones. They actually don't shoot bullets, they shoot these pellets. But emergency room doctors in Gaza said these pellets are actually much, much more destructive than bullets. And these quadcopters they call them sniper drones, are actually much, much more destructive even than bullets. The New York Times reported in April of 2025, again, kind of even more expansive use of artificial intelligence by the IDF. The use of artificial intelligence audio to target a top Hamas commander in late 2023. And on the one hand, you might say, well, of course you should target a top Hamas commander. They're responsible for the attacks on October 7th. But in targeting that top Hamas commander, 125 civilians also died in the attack. Israel has also used AI to compile potential airstrike targets. It's created Arabic language AI models to power a chatbot to scan and analyze text messages, social media posts, and other Arabic language data. It's deployed technologies. This deployment of technologies has led to mistaken identities and arrests and civilian deaths. AI-powered algorithms lock on and track targets from a distance. And right now, at temporary checkpoints between North and South Gaza, cameras equipped with the ability to scan and send high-res images of Palestinians to back facial recognition systems. So we have all of this collection of data, without a clear sense of what this data is being used for and how is it being kind of double checked. And we already know that there are kind of error rates kind of inherent within this data. The last concern relating to autonomous drones that is still hypothetical, but definitely concerning, is this issue of drone swarms. So the U.S. General Accountability Office defines drone swarms as coordinated systems of at least 3 and potentially thousands of drones that can perform missions of autonomously that can perform missions autonomously with minimal human oversight. And these swarms leverage swarm intelligence, mirroring biological systems seen in groups of ants, bees, or birds, where decentralized rules create complex collective behavior. So if you've seen, again, kind of Canadian geese flying, or kind of bees swarming, ants swarming, basically what people who program would program drone swarms is they try and mimic that kind of behavior, so that once a drone locked onto a target, the drones would swarm towards that target. Right now, that that kind of behavior is limited to kind of those biological patterns of swarming, because the drones can't speak to one another, right? They can't say, okay, let's all go and glom onto the target. They have to kind of follow in these biological patterns. Once drones can speak to each other, that's where it gets really scary, right? Because then they will kind of all be able to kind of say, okay, we're all going to the target, which is here, as opposed to operating in these kind of biological patterns. But modern swarms integrate artificial intelligence and machine learning to navigate obstacles like GPS jamming, radio signal interference, and adverse environmental conditions. They maintain synchronized operations, again, because they kind of operate in these biological patterns. So these kinds of drone swarms, so counter drone technology is complicated because and we saw this actually in Russia, and we've seen it a little bit on the front lines in Russia and Ukraine. To shoot down one drone, it is not terribly difficult. Drones are relatively small and they don't have a lot of self-defense mechanisms. But to shoot down 50 drones actually is really complicated. And so that's why drone swarms, drone swarms kind of can easily overwhelm defenses, and that will in the counter drone mechanisms to push back drone swarms will be much more expensive than it is to implement the drone swarm itself. So this could really potentially change the nature of warfare, which is why a lot of people are looking at this most recent attack that Ukraine was able to execute in Russia and saying this is a potential game changer because it does kind of highlight a vulnerability that hasn't really been fully considered before. So now I want to kind of back up from these specific examples and talk a little bit about how, in general, artificial intelligence kind of fundamentally changes some of the ways we think about war fighting. And there are kind of three major, if we think about kind of the basic principles of conflict, Karl von Clausewitz, who is a Prussian military theorist, has this notion of the paradoxical trinity, which is that, war always consists of, it is violent, right? It has this kind of primordial violence that you can't really avoid. There's always an element of chance and probability, which means there's always this uncertainty. And then it always has to be kind of subordinated to politics. So it's always a tool of politics. Well, artificial intelligence is disruptive to kind of some of these notions that we kind of have to struggle with when we're dealing with war. So the first thing that we have to struggle with is information processing. So, on the one hand, artificial intelligence vastly speeds up our ability to process information, which seems like it is a great thing, right? Because we can increase our ability to speed up information, we can see patterns much more quickly. But the way that artificial intelligence and kind of machine learning works, it is a bit of a black box. And so a lot of people who study artificial intelligence talk about kind of this like the black box problem, which is that fully we don't fully understand how artificial intelligence is learning. And so we don't fully understand how is it getting to how is it getting to what it is learning? How is it getting to the outcome that it is getting to? And sometimes these systems can be quite brittle. And so, for example, graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley found that an AI system they had trained to consistently beat Atari video games fell apart when they added just one or two random pixels to the screen. So, that's not, you don't want to have that kind of brittle system when you're kind of depending on a system in warfare to kind of give you information, to kind of be processing information for you in real time. The second issue, which is related to information processing and speed, is that you're getting so much information so quickly that it's straining your ability to make decisions, particularly in contemporary conflicts where so often we are doing, multinational operations. So we need to have the ability to deliberate. We need to have the ability to talk to our allies. We need to have the ability to kind of think through decisions. And if we're getting information that's coming in so quickly can be an asset, right? Because we can act more quickly, we can act more quickly than our adversary anticipates, but it also means that we can catch our allies off guard, that we can alienate our allies by having them feel like they are not in a, not a part of the decision-making process. And that can weaken our entire operation. So thinking about how the speed actually can be a disadvantage. And then expanded capacity is a huge benefit as well, right? So if we think about, particularly if we go back to the example of Ukraine, Ukraine does not have the manpower that Russia does, right? They simply do not have the population. And so drones, this is called the loyal wingman idea. Drones can allow, one Ukrainian fighter to control, potentially 50 drones. That vastly expands the force they can bring to the battlefield. But assuming that they can control all those drones also brings with it those vulnerabilities, right? Assuming they can control all those drones, assuming that those drones can't be turned against them, in assuming that force is reliable, creates challenges. And so I think it's important to remember the kind of words of James Rogers, who's an expert on drone warfare and emerging technologies at Cornell University. No matter how precise your weapon systems are, if your intelligence is wrong, then all that precision, that guaranteed destruction of the target means is the guaranteed death of the wrong person. So experts in this area raise a lot of concerns about the risks of artificial intelligence. And you can see just a few of them here: the damage to information integrity, the intentional use of AI, inequities, introduction of malicious use of AI by non-state actors. I want to highlight a few where we've seen some real challenges. One is this issue of data poisoning. So MIT professor Eric Lynn Greenberg has kind of raised the specter that a rival could poison imagery data to throw off target recognition systems, leading the system to miss military targets, classify them as non-military ones, or identify civilian infrastructure as military facilities. So just thinking about how our adversaries might kind of just put incorrect data into our system, would we even know that that incorrect data was there? Building off of that, we know that that from a Washington Post report in April of 2025, Russia has been working to automate the spread of false information to fool artificial intelligence chatbots on key topics, offering a playbook to other bad actors on how to game artificial intelligence to push content meant to inflame, influence, and obfuscate instead of inform. So many versions of false stories and propaganda appear first on Russian-controlled media, and so in a form of so-called information laundering. These stories then move on to more ostensibly independent media sites, which are then called the Pravda network. Almost no humans visit these sites. Their sites are aimed mainly at crawlers, which are software programs that scour the web and bring content back to search engines and LLMs. So by depending so much, like building so much of our security strategy on this reliance on information technology, we really do make ourselves vulnerable to potential manipulation. The last concern is, I think, a unique concern that I raise because of my work, particularly related to ethics in war, and that is overconfidence and automation bias. And this is kind of what we saw with the IDF soldiers deferring to the autonomous systems. Humans defer to machines' authority. They believe that it is better, faster, more cognitively powerful. This can lead to moral de-skilling, the assumption that moral calculations happen elsewhere. Um, and this is particularly concerning to me because it basically suggests that we are handing over vital decisions about targeting and decision making that are at the core of human dignity to machines. Now, some people in the kind of ethics of war space have argued that this could be beneficial because humans are emotional. They sometimes make decisions that are can be based on you know hurt. They've seen their buddies killed, so they act out of revenge or other notions. But they also sometimes act out of honor. And a machine um, does not, is only fed heuristics. And sometimes, and there's a great example of this in a video I watched of a case in Afghanistan where the Taliban used a young girl to be a spotter to identify, if there was a U.S. military unit that was kind of in a position outside of a town. And of course, the U.S. military unit saw the young girl. She was not terribly sneaky about her role. Um, by all the rules of war, she was a legal combatant and could have been killed. But of course, the U.S. military soldiers did not kill her. And so there is something to having that human in the loop, that human that can make decisions. And there is also something to preserving human dignity to making those decisions. So I think deferring those decisions about what is right and wrong to artificial intelligence that could erode human dignity that concern me a great deal. Um, what are US competitors doing? Um, the primary competitors to the United States, according to Stanford Center for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, um, they have a ranking based on key indicators, including research papers, private investment, and patents. The US is ahead by a wide margin. China comes in second, the United Kingdom third, India fourth, and the United Arab Emirates fifth. Um, China is clearly, and I think very much seen by US companies and the US government as the primary competitor. Already in 2017, China had an artificial intelligence development plan that connected to their widespread CCTV network and their social score system. You might be familiar with their social score system. I think there was a very effective 60-minute story about this. They effectively have all of these CCTV cameras all over the country that track every individual from basic things that they do, like jaywalking, all kinds of behavior that they track. And a good social score can get you small things like better placement in line at the DMV, but it can also help you get more preference in college admissions. It can help you with your job applications, but a bad social score can cause you all sorts of other problems. Um, uh, this kind of then they have transferred that into the military sphere. The People's Liberation Army in 2022 announced multi-domain precision warfare, which is the use of big data and artificial intelligence to rapidly identify key vulnerabilities in US military systems. A major development in January 2025 was the release of DeepSeek, which was the Chinese artificial intelligence platform that was ostensibly a competitor with ChatGPT, but costed much less and did not use the advanced chips that the US systems did. We can talk a little bit about how much of a competitor DeepSeek really is in the Q&A if you all would like to. So China is clearly the primary concern to the United States. Russia, as I have pictured here, is not a major competitor in the global AI sphere, but they are active in using artificial intelligence to continue information operations, to disrupt elections, and for advanced weapon systems. In 2023, Vladimir Putin announced a national strategy for development of artificial intelligence. He told reporters that Russia was expanding fundamental and applied research in the field of generative AI and large language models. He argued that this was necessary because US models were based on Western norms and biases. And in December 2024, January 2025, Putin announced plans to collaborate with both China and the BRICS nations on artificial intelligence. So even though he is not necessarily a competitor, he understands that he needs to be working with key artificial intelligence leaders to remain relevant in this space. What efforts have been made to regulate artificial intelligence? There have been many. There's certainly a recognition in the international community that artificial intelligence is a challenge that needs to be addressed. There is not a ton of agreement on how to do so. Starting in May of 2019, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development created a document on principles on artificial intelligence, which promotes that artificial intelligence is innovative and trustworthy, and that or promoted an artificial intelligence that is innovative and trustworthy, and that respects human rights and democratic values. This was the first principles that was signed up to by governments. All 36 OECD member countries, plus Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, and Romania signed this document. In November 2021, UNESCO created recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence. They warned that they see increased gender and ethnic bias, significant threats to privacy, dignity, and agency, dangers of mass surveillance, and increased use of unreliable artificial intelligence technologies in law enforcement. In December of 2023, the UN General Assembly Resolution 78/241 called for regulation due to humanitarian, legal, security, technological, and ethics concerns. 152 countries voted in favor. Only Belarus, India, Mali, and Russia opposed that resolution. EU passed the AI Act in August 1st of 2024, but this really only banned the high risk use of artificial intelligence. There are currently ongoing negotiations at the UN Convention for Conventional Weapons regarding legal autonomous weapon systems. So that would be kind of killer robots, autonomous weapons. That negotiation does not appear to have gotten very far, although the Secretary General and the United Nations General Assembly has asked that those negotiations be completed by 2026. It's not clear how that will be possible. In April of 2024, a parallel set of negotiations began at the Vienna conference, which suggests that there may be a different venue for negotiations on autonomous weapon systems that may be more fruitful, because this parallel set of negotiations will not require consensus as the UN Convention on Conventional Weapons does. So there's, a lot of efforts going on in the international community to try and regulate artificial intelligence. But like I said, not a lot of agreement on what that regulation would look like. What is current US policy on artificial intelligence and national security? In February of 2019, President Trump actually signed the very first American AI initiative to increase artificial intelligence research investment, unleashing federal AI computing and data resources, setting AI technical standards, building America's AI workforce, and engaging with international allies. This was codified in law as part of the National AI Initiative Act of 2020. In August of 2022, the Chips and Science Act placed US export controls on AI components such as semiconductors, which has stopped AI computer chip producers like NVIDIA and AMD from selling their high-end chips for AI and supercomputing to China. In October of 2022, the White House Office of Science and Technology's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights was released, which included 5 principles for safe and effective AI systems, including algorithmic discrimination protections, data privacy, notice and explanation, and human alternatives to AI systems. And the US government invested over $4 billion in AI research and development in fiscal year 2023. This is really important. In October 30th of 2023, President Biden issued an executive order called the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence. And this included 8 guiding principles and priorities for the safe and ethical use of artificial intelligence. However, on January 20th in 2025, Trump issued an executive order revoking that 2023 Biden executive order. Obviously, when the Chinese released DeepSeek in January of 2025, that was very concerning to President Trump, who said it should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser focused on competing. There's been a big change from the industry where under the Biden administration, the industry expressed a lot of interest in kind of cooperating with regulatory bodies in seeking kind of more cooperation and kind of in seeking regulation, to now arguing that there cannot be any regulation, which has gone along with President Trump's efforts. JD Vance, the vice president, in February went to the Paris AI Summit and argued that we believe excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it is taking off, and we will make every effort to encourage pro-growth AI policies. However, the challenge is that a lot of the DOGE efforts have kind of curtailed a lot of the research and development that would have helped kind of support the foundational research that would be going into artificial intelligence. For example, the National Science Foundation, which has seen its budget gutted, pays for 80% of federal funding for computer science in US academic institutions. We do know that Trump has issued plans to issue an AI action plan for summer 2025. They are soliciting public comment now. AI companies are urging limited regulation. They are creating fear about China achieving what is called hard takeoff, which is that AI models can achieve a tipping point where lightning fast self-improvement launches a dizzying gyre of super capability, also known as AGI. So all of this feels extremely overwhelming. And how do we, as normal people, deal with all of this and prepare for a world inundated with artificial intelligence? I mean, you look at your phone, you write an email, you try to wish someone happy birthday on Facebook. Artificial intelligence is there. Any kind of predictive text, all of this is artificial intelligence. And so I like to end with a little bit of a hopeful note. And so this is also a piece of artwork that is generated through artificial intelligence, but it was commissioned by UNESCO. And this is a report that UNESCO issued, trying to help empower users to think about how do we kind of develop, how do we empower people uh, to have media and information literacy responses to respond to the evolution of generative artificial intelligence. And so some of the things they urge us to kind of think about and prepare for is understanding the role of information, digital technology, and media in sustainable development, democracy, and values. I think it's really important to think about um, how artificial intelligence um, plays a role in democracy, and how we need to kind of be questioning the information around us, because as soon as we start kind of accepting things and accepting things particularly that we just see in search boxes, I think that is a potential threat to democracy. Understanding online content and its uses, assessing information effectively, and practicing ethics, critically evaluating information, messages, and sources, including generative AI, critically and creatively engaging with and applying digital and traditional media formats, situating the social cultural context of information and digital context in relation to, but not exclusive to, gender equality, dialogue, disinformation, privacy, eradicating hate, discrimination, racism, and then managing media and information literacy learning amongst various groups and navigating change. So these are all things that only we can do, right? Only we can control how we consume media. Only we can control how we talk to people around us about how we consume media. And so, in a way, only kind of a bottom-up approach can be effective in thinking about how do we ensure that our day-to-day lives are not overtaken by artificial intelligence and generative AI. So even though that feels like a small thing in the consequence of everything I've talked about today, it is meaningful and important. And I think it's a good reminder that we still do have agency in this world, where it feels like information is kind of running rampant out of control. So I'll stop there, and hopefully answer some questions.
Thanks, Christy. So, oh, can you stop sharing your screen?
I can.
Thanks. Okay, we have a couple questions to start with.
Right.
Um, start with a lowball one here. How serious is the increased use of AI in social media used by the everyday person, such as Google uses AI in their search program to give users a response that can then be used to be posted on many social media places and that can go viral?
Okay. That's a great question. So I actually think that's, I mean, I guess the question is, what do we mean by serious? But I think that is something we should be cautious about. I think this is exactly the example of where I think we should be critical of the kind of information that we're getting.
Mhm.
I find that when I search Google and I get that kind of, like, there's no way around it, right? I can't turn that off. But I do find that often it's misleading. So I don't find that that information is usually helpful. Sometimes if you look at, so when you get that kind of AI generated response from Google at the top of your search, it will give the sources for it. So sometimes I will go to those sources.
Mhm.
Um, but I generally will not pay it much heed. I will go to the information, I will go to trusted websites. So as a researcher, I'm like, what are my trusted websites? And oftentimes that depends. So for example, I have been doing a lot of research on taking care of my parents. So looking at, how do I apply for Medicaid? So then I want to go to government websites or things like that. So I really do try and think about what are trusted, or I look at the Alzheimer's Association. So I really do try and think about what are trusted websites versus just relying on the artificial intelligence responses. I think you have to take them for what they are, which is, again, AI is trying to aggregate information, but it doesn't necessarily know what's good and what's not good. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, and in terms of fact-checking resources, we have somebody wondering about the source of the IDF target rate failures of
Mhm.
10% that
Yeah.
we had.
So that came from, so there was a Haaretz article and then also a Guardian article. I don't know if I have the dates of those, but those are the two articles that I used for that source. Yep.
Okay. Um, is the danger of AI similar to the danger of the atomic bomb before we fully understood its devastation capabilities? I would say.
Oh, that's a great question. I actually think there are ways in which the danger of AI is greater. And I think what Stuart Russell, who makes this argument, Stuart Russell is making an analogy to an argument I've heard made about landmines. So landmines by themselves, anti-personnel landmines, um, by themselves, like one, doesn't seem like all that dangerous, right? But that's why millions and millions and millions of them have been spread in places like Cambodia, in places like Afghanistan, in places like Bosnia, in places like Ukraine now, right? And they will continue to kill people who were never intended to be killed for forever, right? I mean, and it's devastating. So I think that Russell Stewart's argument is that in some ways, because we can put many small drones together, um, because one doesn't seem so dangerous, it becomes too easy to put a bunch together all at once. Whereas the atomic bomb, once it was used, even once it was tested, we really knew how dangerous it was. And I mean, there's a reason why it was used the two times it was used, right? Which was two times more than it should have been used, arguably.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I think the risk is that these weapons, their thinkability, which is I think a concept that comes from Thomas Schelling, their thinkability is just so much greater. Like we can it's so much easier to incorporate them into military planning than it was to incorporate the atomic bomb into military planning. And I think that's what makes them more dangerous.
Okay. Um, okay. Gonna go with a shorter one before I have a super long question.
Okay.
Has there been any consensus by nations around an international law requiring that humans be kept in the loop as opposed to purely autonomous operation?
That's a great question. So the answer is no. So these negotiations that are happening right now at the Convention on Conventional Weapons, and there's great journalism on this. Jody Williams, who won the Nobel Prize for her work on the landmine ban treaty, she is leading up the effort to ban killer robots, and so she's one of the key people, kind of leading the nonprofits working on this issue. What's happening at the Convention on Conventional Weapons on this is that they cannot even get agreement on the definition of what lethal autonomous weapon systems are. And so this is why the requirement for consensus in this UN body is slowing things down. So this is why they've tried to move to Vienna to this alternative kind of this parallel negotiating path in the hope that they might be able to get some consensus on
Mhm.
humans in the loop. It's possible then they might get a treaty out of this alternative path. What will happen though is what happened with the landmine ban treaty is that you might get a treaty, but you will not have your major countries sign it. And there will always be trade-offs there with that.
Okay. So here's a long one.
Okay.
What do you see the long-term evolution, for example, 50 years hence, of AI warfare and regulation? Will it be limited by mutually assured destruction, such as a Cold War type thing? Will the entity, such as national or corporate, with the biggest, fastest data processor win? Will humans become more and more alienated as they interact with fewer other humans? And or will we learn how to use the benefits of AI and reject the negatives?
Mm. Such a good question. And I've had a similar question before. Um, this question makes me think of something that I was looking up recently. So there's a play by, and I'm going to get the pronunciation of it's wrong. It's a Czech author named Kopchak, I think it's called Rossum's Universal Robots. And I'll kind of just briefly summarize the plot, but it's basically this notion that um, there's this company that creates these functionally slave robots, and then the robots take over the world. And so when I think about, as we have more and more advanced AI, like will AI take over the world? Um, and what will that look like? I keep coming back to that story that I've read and thinking about what does it mean, because I think at the end of the day, the the robot, like there's a human sentience, like everything kind of goes in a circle. um I do think that obviously resources are always going to play a role. So I don't know. So Russell Stewart has an argument about this because he says, wouldn't, like people have argued, wouldn't it be nice if we just, and this goes back to the movie War Games from the 1980s, if people remember this with Matthew Broderick, like, wouldn't it be nice if we would just play war, if war was just a video game, and then whoever won, won, and whoever lost, lost, and it was over. And Russell Stewart says it's just not that easy, right? And I think we even see this in Ukraine, right? So, like Russia is really frustrated because Ukraine, like this recent strike, like Ukraine got them, right? Like they got a bunch of really expensive bombers that is going to be hard for Russia to replace. So what is Russia's response? Well, doing what it's always done, which is attacking civilians, right? So, and Russell Stewart is right. Like the essence of war, and this comes back to what I said about Clausewitz, is this primordial violence is like people are not going to stop fighting until the fighting becomes untenable. And so, um, and this is, so I don't know. I don't know if it will be mutually assured destruction or if it will be something more like there's not a benefit to fighting in a way. Like I think of it more like global trade, right? To like not that it's mutually assured destruction, but that like we just don't see a benefit to fighting. I guess maybe that's something like I don't know if the person with the question wants to clarify, but that maybe that's something like mutually assured destruction. Um, I do think that humans can see a benefit from artificial intelligence. We see that now. There are huge benefits. There are huge medical benefits. Um, Autonomous drones and artificial intelligence can be huge in helping us actually with things like demining, with things like helping us identify and protect the habitats of endangered species. There are lots of ways in which artificial intelligence can be hugely beneficial. Um, but of course, and this is, I think, the thing, like technology is a tool. It's how you use it,
Mhm.
right? So unfortunately, as humans, we will use the tool for both good and for ill. And so I think just like all technology, I think the risk, and I just heard, so again, I don't pretend to be a computer scientist, but I just heard a podcast, and the scientist was talking about kind of AI agents and autonomy. And one thing that struck me that I could understand was that she said that autonomy and ethics cannot go together. So because if AI becomes autonomous, there's no controls. There's no ethics, right? Because there's no thinking. And so that does concern me, right? In the same way that kind of taking the so if AI, if there are no humans in the loop, then I think that concerns me. So I think humans have to figure out how to maintain control. And I think inevitably someone will see a benefit to not having that. And then that does really concern me.
Okay. How concerned are you about AI hallucinations? Do you think there's anything that can prevent that?
I mean, I am concerned about it. It comes in handy for me as a professor because it makes it easier to catch students when they use artificial intelligence for their assignments. Um, uh, I think AI is going to get better about that. So, but I do think it's incredibly dangerous. In fact, just yesterday, that's what I was hearing was, um, the more we automate AI to act on our behalf, then when there are hallucinations, totally unintended things can happen that could have horrifying consequences, right? So I do worry about that a lot, which is why, again, I think we have to be really careful. I mean, again, it's like as individuals, when and as individuals, as governments, we have to think about how much do we really want to automate? How much do we really want to give up control of certain aspects, and particularly in terms of national security? How much do we, how much control do we really want to give up of some of these systems? Um, and so it's like, yeah, efficiency is nice. But I think at the end of the day, decisions have to be in the hands of humans.
Yeah. Okay. Could you talk more about the low-cost Chinese AI?
Sure. Yeah. So DeepSeek. So, oh my goodness, DeepSeek. So when DeepSeek came out in January, it caused NVIDIA stocks. So DeepSeek is a ChatGPT equivalent. So you can, and what's unique about it is that, like for example, if you went on your browser right now and you use OpenAI and you create an account and you use ChatGPT, you use it in your browser and it's fine. You can do the same thing with DeepSeek, or you can download DeepSeek and use it completely disconnected from your browser, which is interesting. So it doesn't have to be connected to the browser. Um, it does not use the highly advanced NVIDIA chips that American AI systems use, but it has very similar capabilities. Now, when it first was released in January, the notion was that it was not exactly the same, but virtually comparable, which then caused NVIDIA stocks to fall, I think, by half because it was cost like a small percentage of what it costs to develop things like OpenAI, use these much less complicated chips, and in the aftermath, kind of in the months following, we discovered that, well, it probably cost more than what they said at the outset. And the way it wasn't quite as good as they said it was at first. Um, it it builds on a different system, and I'm not going to get into it too much. I can say that it uses like a system of experts, instead of like a kind of broader system. I'm not a computer scientist, so I'm not going to get too much into that because I can't get much further than that as an explanation. But another really important thing about DeepSeek is that it is still Chinese made. So if you try and ask about Tiananmen, it will say, I don't know about that. Let's talk about something else. And so it is limited in that
Mhm.
way. Um, so one of the challenges with really assessing Chinese progress on these kinds of issues is that the Chinese research is a little bit more opaque than American research. And that's not to say American research is completely transparent, because it's not. Um, and but is this kind of fear of things like DeepSeek, and this is exactly what we see, and we're seeing this especially now with the call for responses on the AI action plan. If you go on Trump's AI action plan call for responses, you can see OpenAI's response, which is we absolutely need unfettered ability. They want open copyright, so they want the ability to access anything without any copyright regulations, because they want to
Mhm.
be able to develop anything they want, so that they can just move forward with AI. And it's fear mongering about Chinese AI development. And that is, you know, um, I think it's a problem. I mean, I think there's and there's not really any disagreement that we should maintain the export controls against NVIDIA chips going abroad, right? There seems to be a lot of movement towards the Taiwan Semiconductor Company building plants in the United States. There's a lot of investment coming back. I mean, this is the CHIPS Act, this is the Biden plan, so this is not new. Um, but I do think it it raises concerns about um, just kind of this notion of unfettered, right, like unfettered technological development, and kind of just complete deregulation of this industry and what they might be able to do. Um,
Okay. In response to that, I'm going to go to a latest
yeah,
question that came in, even
yeah,
though we have tons, but
yeah, yeah.
due to the rapidly developing AI capabilities of our adversaries, is it
Yeah.
realistic to believe that the US can protect itself from future devastating attacks on systems that are heavily reliant on electronic functions, such as financial systems, healthcare systems, or public utility systems? Please reassure me, is one of the things they're saying at the end.
Um, I don't want to. I'm like, I
I know it's that fine
I'm
line
like,
between
I
fear
want to
mongering
be,
and
yeah, I want to be reassuring. I mean, I think that the US is doing everything it can. Like things like Volt Typhoon, which I talked about, it's not like we didn't know that this was happening. We were on it. And I think we're very aware, and the US has long, so the first thing I will say is the US, like the Stanford ratings are very clear. The US is far, far ahead of its adversaries in terms, or it's far ahead of its competitors, right? In terms of developing AI. I think in terms of cyber defenses, we are doing, large systems are very secure, right? So like infrastructure systems, like all of those attacks that Volt Typhoon tried to do were thwarted. We knew that the Chinese were trying to do them. We stopped them. Then we said, hey, you're trying to do this. And the Chinese were like, yeah, sure, we were. Um, but I do think what I do worry about are, and this is where I was like hedging, is smaller systems are very vulnerable to ransomware. And this is like your local municipal hospitals, your local municipal water plants. And that is just because cyber defenses at those local levels are more uneven, right? So like your big infrastructure, I'm much less worried about, although there's concerns, right? But I think those areas are something that people are thinking about all the time. I think it's more that local level protection is expensive and hard for local places to invest in. And that's why those tend to be the lower hanging fruit. Like I think I mentioned, like North Korea is like one of the number one, um, you know, perpetrators of ransomware attacks. And it's just because, and they go after this low hanging fruit of, your local municipal water system or your local hospital because they can, right? And unfortunately, this ransomware has developed into a cottage industry of insurance and things like that. So bigger systems, I think we can feel safe. It's the smaller systems I worry.
Okay. Here's one. Is the focus on AI misdirected? AI is a tool. It's the humans that are making these decisions. Before AI, IDF just dropped bombs on targets with a lot of collateral damage. Depending on AI with a failure rate is still a moral failure, not an AI issue.
Um, I think that's a great point. And I will say, I think this is I think a really important debate. There's a lot of so one thing that the IDF, that the Israeli military is really clear about anytime they are confronted with a concern is that they investigate and that they always comply with international law. And I think their argument is, and this is again gets at this kind of the allure of precision technology and kind of the benefit of precision technology. And this is, again, me getting into my kind of ethics of war side. Precision technology allows you to target in places that you wouldn't target with a dumb bomb, right? Like you can target in a specific place because you think you can be precise with it. Well, your precision only works if your intelligence is good, right? Um, so the questioner is right. Yeah, if you're just gonna straight up attack a whole huge building in a densely populated area, yep, you're gonna kill a lot of civilians anyway, right? But I don't think that's what the IDF wants to say it's doing. The
Mhm.
IDF that wants to say it's being targeted. The trick is that if they're using systems that have this failure rate, can they really say that? And so this is the debate that I think Israel is going to have, right? And I think that one of the challenges right now is I don't think everyone in Israel, and I mean part of it is just so difficult right now. We are still so it's still emotionally raw after October 7th. But I do
Mhm.
think there is a debate to be had about like what kind of response is justified to that kind of attack and how do we get out of this, right? I think everyone's kind of asking themselves that, like how do we get out of what's happening in Gaza, and I don't think there's a good answer to that.
Yeah,
I
someone's
certainly
wondering
I don't have
if
one.
if there's a consensus yet among nations about AI and drones not deploying weapons of mass destruction. And I'm like thinking, is it too new for there to be a consensus yet?
um it's too new for there to be a consensus, and in some ways we're seeing the undoing of consensuses, which is really unfortunate. I think that um, I just think that the way wars are being fought now, so for example, um, Romania has decided to withdraw from the landmine ban convention. And a big reason why is because of the war in Ukraine. And I think that is because we're like all of these things we thought we knew about war are we don't know anymore. And so but that's kind of what happens sometimes with norms in international law, is that we go backwards. So
Okay. Someone's just wondering, do you think Gaza is being used as a testing ground for these weapons? And I'd say,
I mean, I think that's a really hard question. I mean, I think that Israel has long been at the forefront of uh, developing advanced technological weapons. So they have a need. And so they are, trying to meet that need with the weapons they have.
Okay. I'm going to ask this one because we might want clarification from the person who asked it, but
Okay.
increased national security concerns when allies no longer fully trust U.S. intelligence are clear. Does AI suggest any additional dimensions as to what that trust, as that trust decreases? And I don't know if we want clarification from her on things or if you think you can.
Well, I'm gonna try and repeat that to make sure I understand it, and maybe we'll get clarification.
Okay.
So if allies no longer trust US intelligence, could artificial intelligence provide additional trust? Am I,
Yeah, like
yeah. Um, I think that's a really hard question to answer because of the potential for misinformation, right? So if you don't trust information already that's out there, I'm not sure, like you'd have to know where your information is coming from. Like that's, I think, one of the risks. I mean, because it's all about triangulation. And that's what's really tricky about intelligence. I suppose that artificial intelligence would allow you to see multiple sources of intelligence to see if the US intelligence was completely out of whack with other intelligence. It would allow you to see if it did appear as an anomaly. But sometimes the anomaly can be correct. And so, but it would give you some leverage on that, I guess. Maybe if there's clarification. Um,
Okay, so this seems to be a good follow-up. Do you think the federal government should be more heavily regulating the development and use of AI in general? Because in a recent New York Times opinion essay, Amodai, the CEO of Anthropic, called for a federal transparency standard for AI companies that would require policies for testing models and disclosing risks that they pose. We can't simply hope that AI companies will act responsibly.
Yeah, I thought this was fascinating. So I do think so Anthropic wasn't always alone in calling for federal government regulation, right? OpenAI, other AI companies were out there calling for federal regulation as well. And I think there's some benefit to transparency. So a colleague of mine, Noreen Herzfeld, who also works on technology, I was asking her the other day, I was like, do you know why Anthropic is still calling for regulation when other companies aren't? And she wasn't sure. Um, so I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with Anthropic, but Anthropic also has just been sued by Reddit for illegal use of scraping of their sites. So my one fear would be like what are Anthropic's motives, right? Like if Anthropic just really believes in transparency, I'm like, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's possible too, like Anthropic could be wrong in one venue and right in the other venue, right? So but yes, I think that more transparency could be really useful because again, it's that the warning that scientist gave the other day in this podcast really ring in my mind that like autonomy and safety are at odds with one another. And so if there's not transparency, if we cannot see into systems, um, then we cannot know if they're ethical. We cannot know if they are safe. So yeah. I do think there has to be some regulation. And I think the risk of this, which is probably less risky now than it was 5 years ago, is that and actually I do think this is a challenge now with Doge, is that um, probably in December 2024, we had fantastic resources within the federal government who could do this kind of work.
Mhm.
Whether we still have those resources in the federal government now, I don't know.
So, well, somebody did look up the Rossum's Universal Robots that you talked
Yeah,
about, and it's a 1920 science fiction play by the Czech writer Karel Čapek, I think.
topic. Okay, yeah.
And the play had its world premiere on January 2nd, 1921, and it introduced the word robot to the English language and to science fiction as a whole. So, um,
It's a great play if people read it. I read it many, many years ago, but I really liked it.
so okay, someone's asking, can you give an example or definition of AI hallucinations?
Sure. So some I'll give you a very practical one. So sometimes students will ask artificial intelligence to do an assignment for them. So write an essay on such an on why do advanced democracies um, experience democratic backsliding? And so write me an essay on that. And so it does. And you go through the citations, and some of them might be real and some of them do not exist. And so that's an example of a hallucination. It's just and in fact, we saw a real life example of this with the FDA report recently that was released. Uh, oh my gosh, why am I blanking uh, on? Uh, but this FDA report on human health and sorry, but the all kinds of thing like the I think it was health of children. Anyway, there were citations that I believe it was New York Times found there were citations that did not exist.
Yes,
So,
well, like the Chicago Tribune
yes.
printed its list of
Oh,
recommended
yes.
summer reads, and
Yes.
we, as librarians, we were all over this because only five of the books actually existed on the list. All of the others were not books coming out by these authors, and
Yeah.
they were not the only newspaper to use this list that had been generated. It was just
Yeah.
nobody fact checked before they
Yeah.
printed it. So,
Right. Yeah. No, it happens more often than people realize. Although it is, I will say that I think it gets better with each iteration of ChatGPT at least. So yeah, it
okay,
used to be an easy way to catch students and
so one last question then. What are specific ways the public can learn to be appropriately suspicious of and recognize fake news and not be swayed by it?
I like to triple check things. So a lot of times if I see something, especially if I see something on social media, and to me it's always something where it seems extreme or it seems like kind of too good to be true or too bad to be true, right? Um, then I will be like, and I will double check it. And and I look for trusted sources. So that means a newspaper that I know. And that's not just the New York Times or the Washington Post, but like the Chicago Sun-Times, like the LA Times, and just like, not necessarily just national newspapers, but trusted regional newspapers too. Um, Things like that. Um, and Now that is, for news per se. But that's what I do if I see something like that. I also, if I see something where maybe it's local, maybe reach out if you know people who would know, right? That's
Hmm.
kind of what I would do. But also, yeah, I mean, also kind of, I think our guts know, right? Our guts know what's right and wrong. And I think that's where we have to kind of get back to that stuff. And this is a little bit about political polarization, but I think we we want to believe things that kind of go along with how our pre-existing political beliefs. I think we have to check ourselves in that way too. So that's kind of,
Right.
yeah,
One way is instead of just taking it off of the internet, go to look if you search something, look for results from actual newspapers
yeah,
or um so that you can sit there and go, I'm going to go and read an actual article. I'm going to go and watch an actual news show.
yeah,
Because if it's just something that's not like a, s- a TV show that you recognize or a source that you recognize, find a source that you do and see if you can
yes.
verify claims.
Absolutely. It's like go away from like the social media and I try and I tell students this too, try and stay away from aggregators when you're doing this. There's a lot of places that will bring bunch of sources of news together. Try and find like the original source. So
Check on your library databases.
exactly. Library. Oh, trust me, I'm a huge fan of the library databases. So yeah.
So, okay, well, we are at 11:30, and I want to thank you, Christy, for
Yeah.
just a really engaging and interesting talk. And um, thank you to everyone for all of your questions. It was a really good session of questions, and we will be back in 2 weeks. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.